Folks, the storms are coming. Well, you are living in the Caribbean. Well, that's if you are living in the Caribbean. So that is to be expected, and we are in the hurricane season after all. Between June and November, when most of these storms come in. But yes, we are currently, well, according to when you're looking at this, from today, Monday, the 27th of June, it seems like we are on somewhat of a storm watch. Not directly a storm watch, but bad weather. Or good weather if you like that kind of rain, stormy weather. But nonetheless, you know how it goes in the Caribbean. And there are multiple systems. The strange thing is, Sunday gone, the meteorological office sent out a yellow warning, rains are coming in, things might get a little sketchy out there. And then somewhere around mid-afternoon, they canceled it. And then as soon as they canceled it, the thunderstorms came. And now we're hearing that there are multiple systems out in the Atlantic that we should be keeping our eyes on. So we're going to get into those a bit. And I think there are some wider lessons on generally living in the Caribbean and general life on a whole that we could get from some of this, and we'd get into that. But before we get into that news, hit that like button if you haven't done so yet, or if you like the video, please do that. It really does help. And you can drop a comment if you have something to say, or even if you don't really have something to say, drop a comment still. Let me know you're there and you're listening. Subscribe if you are not yet subscribed, and share the video to those who may like this kind of content. So yes, let's get into it. Tropical disturbance to bring heavy rain, gusty winds to TNT. A tropical disturbance is on a collision course with Trinidad and Tobago, with the National Hurricane Center indicating tropical storm watches and warnings could be required for portions of the windwards and Venezuela today. As of 8 p.m. yesterday, the tropical wave was located in the central Atlantic near 45 degrees west latitude, etc., etc., etc. I have my nice weather map pulled up, and in case you can't tell by the map behind me, I like geography. I find geography very interesting. It's interesting to know the physical world that we reside in. And if you look at this weather map, it shows a nice picture here of what is currently going on. If you can see Trinidad and Tobago, you see one weather system just past us. Those bunches of clouds you see there, that's one just past us. This is one, you're seeing some clouds there. And if you're familiar with how hurricanes look, and that nice, well, according to how you consider nice, but that evenly formed spiral of clouds, these aren't yet at that stage. So we aren't in hurricane watch. These aren't yet at that kind of storm or tropical depression stage, but they're forming up, and there is still some time before it arrives at Trinidad and Tobago, and it seems pretty likely to hit Trinidad and Tobago pretty hard. If you scroll out a bit here, you didn't know that the mindful sessions would go into a whole weather map, huh? Curious stuff. If you scroll out here and you look from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean, you literally see just system after system after system, quite literally, on their way here. This could play, and if you play, you'd kind of see the direction they're all moving in. Yes, they're moving to this direction. That whole channel of wind, as it were, that you see coming there, those weather systems that you see coming there, to a large extent, that was responsible for why a lot of us are here in the first place. Right from the west coast of Africa, blowing straight into the Caribbean, straight into the Western world. Those were the winds that basically brought the slaves. The slave ships came in that direction on that middle passage there. That is the middle passage. And the middle passage still brings us, wow, I don't know if to say gifts from Africa, because, according to how you look at that, it could get pretty sketchy. But the middle passage is still, bringing things from Africa this way, and in this case it's bringing moisture and weather systems across the ocean, one after the other after the other. And we are being told here in Trinidad and Tobago that we have to now brace for this stormy weather. Disaster management agencies kick into high alert. Citizens are being urged to prepare for the worst as a potential tropical cyclone churns its way through the mid-Atlantic with Trinidad and Tobago in its sights. As of 2 p.m. yesterday, the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service warned that the system is likely to turn into a tropical depression, with effects being felt as early as tomorrow. So it's on its way here. And regardless of how much it intensifies, if we go back there to the system, regardless of whether it turns into a full hurricane, whether it stays just the same, it's going to bring heavy rain and wind. Nonetheless, that's pretty much factual by now. We know it is going to bring something, regardless of what we do. And this, to me, the lesson in some of this is that reality is reality. We're placed here in Trinidad and Tobago, if you're living here in Trinidad and Tobago or wherever in the world you are, and there's nothing we could do about redirecting this whole line of weather systems that inevitably land in the Caribbean. Now, the strange thing that makes some people say that God is a Trini or things as such is that very often what we see very often is that these weather systems often turn a little upwards right before they reach Trinidad and Tobago. If you're scrolling here, Trinidad and Tobago is kind of tucked into South America, and many of these weather systems kind of take a little upward trajectory and pass over Trinidad and Tobago. So very often you hear people talk about God as a Trini, and it has to do with the way partly has to do with the way how these weather systems naturally go. They naturally avoid land to some extent because they gain power over the warmer ocean. So as they move into South America, a lot of them just kind of plot a little upward. So who knows, this might do the same thing, but even if it shifts a little upward, even if it doesn't develop into a full heavy system, either way we are going to get some stormy conditions. The alarm buzzer was pressed yesterday during a virtual news conference hosted by local government minister Faris Al-Rawi. So Mr. Al-Rawi jumped out of that heat inside of the Attorney General's office, and now as Minister of Local Government and Rural Development, he is facing the challenge of the hurricane season that seems imminent. Flanking him on the head table were Works Minister Rohan Sinanan, Public Utilities Minister Marvin Gonzalez, while Communications Minister Simon De Nabriga led the conversation. Colonel Rodney Smart of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, ODPM, was also present, along with a representative of the Met Service. So they had the full works out there. And that kind of gives the impression that they're taking this pretty seriously. I heard over in Tobago, the Tobago Emergency Management Association, I believe they are TEMA, they're talking about the steps that they are taking, and they spoke about the rivers that they have dredged, etc., etc., etc. But to some extent, the warning is going out to prepare, because there isn't a way for us to fully avoid the consequences of living in the Caribbean. That's just not possible. As I was pointing out just before, by just the location of where we are, these weather systems come through the Middle Passage, as it were, and land in the Caribbean. There's nothing we could do about that. We could sit in the Caribbean here and say that it's unfair. We've been historically oppressed. We shouldn't be taking these weather systems. We must make a stand, and there must be no more of this nonsense. It's unfair for us to sit and take these weather systems. Well, actually, there's nothing we can do about it. And if you live in a certain spot in the Caribbean near to a river where they literally call it the floodplain, that part, you see, in the natural cycle of a river, rivers through the year flood their plains at some point in time, because rivers aren't made to hold all the water that would be passing through it during the maximum flow time. So there are times when the rivers may overflow their banks. And if you go live on a flood plain, now floodplains are very nutritious, because when the river overflows its banks, the soil on the banks gets rich and nice, good. You could have good crops there. But if you go live on a flood plain, you'd have some consequences to take for that. It's like a discussion I was having with a friend sometime earlier, and we were talking, the irony is that discussion had to do with abortion, the main topic in the last couple of days. But part of it was the point that there are certain realities in life that are just unavoidable. There are tragedies, there are difficulties of life that you cannot avoid. There's no other option to it. There's no way you can opt out of it. You cannot negate these negative consequences in life. If you live on a floodplain, very likely the river would flood and you would have to face the consequences of that flood. If you dredge the river, you dig it deeper, as we do in Trinidad and Tobago, you could end up causing the river to at max flow to have too fast of a rate, and then you end up silting the entire bay when all the silt runs through the river and dumps into the sea. And there you have a whole new consequence where you destroy the sea and ocean life when the silt dumps into the sea, because all you have here is a negative trade-off. You just have trade-offs. You could trade it off to some other negative area, but there's no way you could actually avoid those consequences. Pretty much at best, what we have to offer is the ability to try to negate some of those consequences and dampen the consequences to some extent. And that's basically what humanity has been doing for a very long time now. We've been trying to figure out ways to dampen some of these trade-offs. So, okay, we live on a floodplain. We try to build a house on stilts to negate some of that. All right, we need to dredge the river, so we would make some nice meanders, and that's why they don't just dredge a straight river from the top of the mountain down to the sea. We try to do things to dampen those consequences. Now, the reality of that is that nearly everything to dampen those consequences requires a lot of energy. The more you want to dampen the very difficult nature of reality, the more energy you need to do that, the more it will cost, because energy costs. You need to be able to do work to dampen those consequences, and doing work costs energy. Energy costs resources, resources cost money, etc., etc. So that's just the reality we live in. And we very often, what I notice in modern times, I notice this, especially with a lot of us in the modern generation, we seem to oftentimes confuse the very dampened reality that we live in, this extremely softened reality that we currently reside in, a reality that is so softened by a lot of energy being output, energy that has been output for a couple centuries now, energy that we have not put out. Other people have done it, and we get the benefit of it. And then we live in this extremely dampened, softened world and expect that this is the real reality. You know, it's unfair if the world isn't super soft for everyone. Well, that's just not how reality works. And unfortunately, also, different people living in different places on the world have different realities to face. We have this storm reality to face. We have this lineup of weather systems just ready to move into the Caribbean at any given time. That's what we have to face living in the Caribbean here. It's the consequence of living in the Caribbean. It's no one's fault, but it's just the reality. And on that note, as different people having different realities to face, there are different solutions to the different realities. So in the Caribbean, we have to have better housing, we have to have better roofs, because, you know, you have the chance of a storm coming in and blowing it out. And similarly, what a segue this is, but similarly, I was reading an article recently, and they were talking about the flower situation we are facing, and the push right now we are seeing so much all over the place about the alternative flowers. Use the crops that are grown here in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is speaking about using the alternative solutions that are most viable to this location that we live in. And I was reading an article that was saying, actually, that still isn't the point. That doesn't go far enough, because the reality is the root crops that we have here are not more suitable to being even used as flour. Alternative flour is not the answer. Social media has been a buzz this past week, and this article is from Eat a Food TT. If you'd like to go there, read some articles. Social media has been a buzz this past week with the news of the national flour mills increasing that. We know what this has been. And we know that NAMDEVCO, the organization that is in charge of our local farmers markets, they have been pushing these alternatives to wheat flours, these local alternatives. And they have set up some events where they proposed recipes, etc., etc. On the surface, the root crop flour alternative is a seductive message. It presents itself as the perfect response, using local products to replace the imported wheat flour. But if we take a closer look at the option, it quickly unravels as a viable solution. Root crop flours are expensive. A 16-ounce bag of cassava flour can retail for around $40. Sweet potato flour sells for around $45. So from a home economic standpoint, it does not make any sense to advise people to purchase root crop flour as an alternative to wheat flour, which will still retail for almost half the cost of root crop flours. Not to mention, if the intention is to continue making bakes, breads, roti, etc., then wheat flour is still needed in most cases to produce these items. You would have to mix the wheat flour with the root crop flour for optimals. Now, the article went on to mention that they were proposing that you produce the root crop flours at home, but that is a labor-intensive and time-intensive process. So again, that isn't necessarily very realistic. And the author suggests forget about flour. My suggestion is a simple but effective one. Forget about flour and just eat the root crops. This is a classic case of the most likely solution being the simplest one. We can simply boil our dasheen, eddos, cassava, yam, and green fig and eat that instead of bread or bake. You don't have to spend extra time trying to turn the ingredients into flour, then invest more time and effort to make meals from them. Also, boiled provisions are the perfect meal prep. You can boil a variety of provisions and have various starches to incorporate into meals for the week. How's that for a proposal? What do you think about that proposal? And I actually kind of like the idea. The problem is we'd have to change our tastes. Now, with globalism, and the article went on to mention all of this, you can have a read there. With globalism, the reality is that we have gotten accustomed to being able to have a diet that only exists because we are able to import things from all different ends of the world. But if we are seeing breakdown in the global supply chains and the global supplies of the food chains, then what we may need is local. And then we may actually have to change our taste to best optimize what is available for us locally. Is the best optimization of root crops drying them, milling them, turning them to flour, and then reverting to turning them into some kind of baked meal? Or is it best to figure out ways to use the root crops much closer to how they are harvested? Wheat was turned into flour because that may be the best way to get the best out of wheat. Wheat is a pretty small grain, and you aren't going to boil that grain and chew it, or maybe you could boil it and just use it like rice, but it was one of the most convenient ways to get the best out of wheat was to mill it into flour. Grand, that's wheat. Is that the best way to use cassava? I don't know. What do you think? I'd like to hear your opinion on that and what you think about the upcoming storm season. Do you think that Trinidad and Tobago would be well prepared for such? Or do you think that we are still depending on God to be a Trini and just move all those storms a little bit upward? Let us just get the slight stormy weather so we can sleep in late and get a day home from work while not having to worry about our roofs leaving our homes. Tell me, drop a comment, tell me what you think. That's all I have for now. I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I will see you later.